Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is John and this is your Modern Tech Breakdown. Today I'm taking a look at the latest lawsuit from Delta Airlines against CrowdStrike over that disaster from earlier this year. Let's jump into it. Well, it finally happened. Delta Airlines has finally launched a lawsuit against CrowdStrike stemming from the July IT outage that brought many companies to a halt. Delta is pursuing $500 million in lost revenue. There had been a lot of speculation over the past couple of months about whether or not Delta was going to sue CrowdStrike, and apparently they're going to. So this is obviously bad news for CrowdStrike. One, obviously they might lose this case. And two, it keeps the outage in the news even longer. So it's just bad PR that's going to continue no matter what happens in the courtroom. Here I have an article from the Register, and there's a few interesting details to cover. First, Delta has hired David Boies, probably one of the most prominent lawyers in America. Getting such an esteemed attorney for this case of this magnitude seems very justified to me. You may remember that David Boies, among many famous cases, represented the United States in the U.S. versus Microsoft antitrust case from the early 2000s. He also worked as a legal representation for the defunct fraudulent blood testing company Theranos and served on the board with Elizabeth Holmes, who is now in jail. So that's just a few relevant lines on David Boies' resume. Needless to say, he's got a long track record of huge cases. So if I'm CrowdStrike, having to face David Boies is a little bit concerning. Also, it's interesting that this article mentions Microsoft as a potential defendant and perhaps a separate suit that Delta could bring. I would imagine Microsoft would have less liability than CrowdStrike in this situation, but you never know what the courts may decide, so I'm sure Microsoft's going to keep a close eye on this one. And there's some back and forth between Delta and CrowdStrike from the lawsuit itself and from some press releases. Some of the more interesting bits in the lawsuit, Delta writes, CrowdStrike caused a global catastrophe because it cut corners and took shortcuts and circumvented the very testing and certification processes it advertised for its own benefit and profit. Later on, in a statement to the Register, Delta said, CrowdStrike has also conceded it failed to adhere to even basic industry practices for IT updates, such as conducting a phased rollout and providing rollback capabilities. In fact, if CrowdStrike had tested this on even a single computer, that computer would have crashed. Yikes. So you'll remember at the time that I broke down the technical details on how this all happened, I was concerned that the level of transparency that CrowdStrike was providing could provide fodder for a lawsuit. And based on this statement from Delta, it certainly seems like they have read those details and plan to use them against CrowdStrike. Hopefully this doesn't become a pattern where companies get tight-lipped and don't release technical details because they're scared of getting sued. CrowdStrike, for their part, stated that they believe the failure of Delta to modernize its dated IT infrastructure was the core reason for why it took them so long to recover from the outage. They also stated that they offered help to Delta, but then Delta claims that that help came more than 65 hours after the initial incident occurred, so not that helpful. So this is an interesting lawsuit to watch. I think it's going to come down to the contractual language between Delta and CrowdStrike. I have to assume that CrowdStrike spent a significant amount of time trying to write language that would reduce or eliminate their liability in a situation like this. So I would imagine Delta has to overcome some of that contractual language with the court. And without knowing what the contract says, it's hard to know who's going to win this case, but I think everybody in the enterprise software space is going to watch this lawsuit very closely. But what do you think? Leave a comment down below. As always, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.